Good afternoon, everybody. We'll be getting started here in just about a minute, promptly around 2 o'clock. I see people connecting now, so we're looking forward to our presentation today. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on coding for accessibility and the user experience. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. So please use the chat box in Zoom for any questions you're having on getting connected or audio issues or similar webinar-related questions. Priya is monitoring the chat box during the webinar, so you have somebody to answer the questions. Please use the Q&A section for any questions you'd like to have us answer at the end of the webinar, as we'll be taking questions as part of the end of the presentation. My name is David Herr. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Alliances here at Common Look, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's presentation. Kim Testa, the Vice President, Executive Vice President, and Gary Hardstad, Vice President of Technology at our partner, the Bureau of Internet Accessibility. So with introductions out of the way, let me turn it over to Kim and Gary to get started on today's presentation.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing very well. My name is Gary Hardstad. I'll be overviewing some major points and techniques for coding an accessible user experience. I will outline some techniques and code practices to help improve accessibility and prevent common accessibility barriers from appearing in your code. There is quite a few points to get through, so I'll get started straight away. Next slide. So, what is coding for an accessible user experience anyway? Really, it's about creating an intuitive and easy to understand user experience and facilitating access to your content for absolutely everyone. And that should definitely include assistive technology users. With a little experience and properly implemented code, you can take full advantage of some default accessibility features that are already built into HTML. Next slide. So developers can anticipate problems by simulating being non-sighted or using a keyboard alone to navigate your page and operate the controls on the page. And after a little experience, a lot of common accessibility barriers can be discovered and resolved quite quickly, maybe even fixed centrally. After following a few conventions and adding a little bit of extra markup to your code, you can also prevent accessibility issues from carrying over to other pages or future projects. And in fact, practicing accessibility coding has a nice thematic learning side effect that helps you think about it when you do all future coding. So how to think accessibility, get native. Keyboard only and non-visual users make up the majority of all accessibility targeted coding. There certainly are other aspects such as color contrasted for nearsighted or slight-sighted people, but the majority of coding for accessibility applies to keyboard only or non-visual users. It's a bit like when websites had to start thinking about search engine optimization. They began altering text and adding structure to their web pages so they could get effectively spidered by popular search engines. And it's a similar process when coding for accessibility. There's often just a few extra tags or properties that can be added to make it more accessible. In summary, all meaningful content should have text equivalency and appropriate roles for assistive technology to correctly discover your content, list your content, and announce your content correctly to your assistive technology users. All users, with or without impairments, need to be given the same access and therefore the same consideration in your coding. Using native links, lists, headings, and ARIA roles, also known as ARIA landmarks, will go a long way to making your content way more natively accessible than before. And that's really what we're after here, a mostly natively accessible HTML structure as a great starting point for your content. So without a mouse for a non-sighted user, there's no hovering that gets perceived. Without sufficient eyesight, the content sections on your page may not be properly visualized. The positioning or presentation may make no sense at all to an assistive tech user. For example, any content that requires a hovering mechanism or a certain level of visual acuity to be functional is de facto inaccessible by design. Remember, text equivalency is king in the world of accessibility. There are a number of ways that assistive technology users navigate your content. Using the tab key, users can bounce through all the elements on your page that have a default tab index or have a specifically applied tab index, such as links, buttons, form fields. Possibly most important, though, is the use of quick keys. AT users can press the letter H to jump through all of your various headings in your page, or they can actually use the numbers to jump to heading level 1, heading level 2, and so on. They can also use the U key to bounce through the unvisited links on your page, and use the V key to bounce through all the visited links. So it's very important that your content facilitates the navigation methods available to the assistive technology users. So next slide. So what you're going to want to focus on is the big stuff first. Resolving initial high impact barriers can go a really long way towards creating a more accessible user experience. Definitely focus on the big stuff first. I have mentioned a list of big stuff items here, such as adding skip links, make sure it's present. Make sure that any alternative texts are populated or empty accordingly. Use native elements and grouping items with lists, and use appropriate headings and ensure they do not skip any heading levels. And we're going to go into those a little bit more on the following slides. So skip links, what are they? A skip link typically allows users to skip over announcing of common navigation items at the top of the page, or banners or header content that appears on every page. You don't really want them to have to read and announce everything that is repeated on every one of your pages. Clicking a skip link would usually scroll the user in the viewport past your common navigation and top banners so they can get immediately to your main content and access and digest that information immediately. They usually skip to the main content of a web page. But the concept of a skip link can be used for repetitive items. So if you had a lot of long lists of links, an assistive technology user might have to navigate them all by reading every single link. But if you add a skip link above the list of links, then they can jump directly past that if they choose not to have to read them. So here's an example of some basic HTML for a skip link. How it might appear on a website. I put on the right here an example of a skip link on the Bureau of Internet Accessibility website. The top image shows you without it showing, and the second image shows you a large black link, skip to content, that appears when the keyboard has focus to that link. It is important that if you create a skip link, that it should be the first element in your DOM body, or your document object model body of your HTML. Because if it comes after your navigation or after your content, it's going to be, one, very hard to find, and number two, it's not going to serve the purpose of allowing you to skip the primary navigation. An important part about the skip link is the destination. When they click your skip link, it needs to take them past the navigation to the main content. So the area it takes them to should have a tab index of -1, which allows the browser to scroll to that, but doesn't necessarily have to have the element in the tab order when people press the tab key. So two main points make this feature operational. First, when they click a skip link, the focus goes to the anchor element that the skip link points to. And secondly, the skip link itself is only visually presented when it has keyboard focus. And I'll show you a little how to do that on the next slides. So here's a little bit of CSS example. Again, it's a little bit technical, but it's here for your reference. The top style rule here provides a skip link that has essentially no sizing. So it's got a padding of 0, a line height of 0, a font size of 0. So it exists in the document model, but it is not visible. When that skip link receives focus from the keyboard, then we apply that second style rule, where it says a.skiplink : focus. And that focus means apply this style when that element has keyboard focus. And in this case, it makes the positioning block, it adds some padding, some font size, so it appears. You can also have your skip links just be off screen and then appear on screen when they're focused as well. Again, it is important to make sure your skip link, your primary skip link, is present before the main navigation so that it is effective. Images. Oh, these are a fun one. A lot of people get images incorrect. But all images and graphics must have a text alternative available to them so that assistive technology can actually announce them to the users. And if the image itself should not be announced, then you absolutely must still provide an alt attribute. Just make sure it is an empty value. An empty value on a graphic tells assistive technology to literally ignore this graphic or do not announce it, which is not the same as a missing alt attribute. Next slide. This reinforces the idea of a decorative image. So any images that have no significant meaning, we're talking small icons that don't add any extra information to the page, decorations, background, textures, all of those things, again, should have an alt attribute, but the value should be a blank string. So that's an alt attribute with empty text. Do not exclude the alt attribute. It's very important. It is not the same as an empty alt attribute. Images of text are even more important. A lot of people miss this one. Images should convey the text exactly provided if there is any. In this case, on the right side, there is an image that says mega sale, Black Friday, up to 60% off. And on the left, you'll show how I've provided that exact same text equivalency in the alt value of that mega sale image tag. The alt says mega sale, Black Friday, up to 60% off. And it's important that all of that alt text matches the image exactly. Otherwise, you have a disparity between visual users and non-visual users where they are giving different information. And that is essentially what we are trying to avoid with accessibility coding. For image-based controls, that are controls that don't contain literal text, you really want to describe the function and not the visual appearance. So this icon on the right there could be given an alt text of graphical icon of a pencil over a notepad, but it wouldn't let any users know what would happen if they operate it. So a non-sighted user would be better off served if it said edit description. And that would tell the user the function and purpose of that icon when they operate it. In summary, do not ignore the alt attribute on images. Always apply an alt attribute and give it a concise value of its purpose, or if it provides no extra meaning, then give it an empty alt value. There are other things you can do to exclude images or other elements from accessibility entirely. For instance, you can add an area hidden equals true to any element on the page, or a role of presentation to any element on the page. And both of those properties will prevent announcement of any of the data in those elements to assistive technology. They essentially will not exist to the AT user. Groups of links and navigation. This mainly affects primary navigation, but primary navigation, when you have lists of links, really should be grouped together, particularly if they would otherwise be adjacent to each other. Groups are very important because they offer an accessibility by design, because a group of links allow assistive technology to announce the link and its position amongst other items in the list. So, a non-visual user could know that they're on link 3 of 4 of a particular navigation menu. And without having a list, it would just announce a link and they wouldn't know where they are. You may also want to wrap primary navigation elements in a nav tag or a div with a role of navigation. And we'll get into roles a little bit more in the future slides here. Another important thing about links is that for a non-visual user or a keyboard user, they're going to have the links announced to them based upon the text that is displayed or provided. So link text must be unique for every destination URL the link points to. So that top paragraph here shows that there are 2 links pointing to different pages, but with the same text. So you can see how that might be confusing to somebody who's reading this is a link, clicking on it, going to your home page, and then going back to the page and clicking this is a link and arriving at an entirely different page. Below is how that should be more presented. There is a link, and then here is a different link. So the link text is separated. Conversely, you obviously don't want to have multiple names for the same URL either. Links on a single page that point to your home page, for instance, should all have the same link text, no matter how many times they appear. Incorrect would be linking to your home page with varying link text, such as visit home page, go back, or go home. Any links on a single page that go to your home page should all have the exact same text. So we come to dynamic and flyout menus. So here we employ a little bit of ARIA. ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and it was implemented by the WAI to assist with accessibility in HTML. So what can ARIA do for me? Well, if you're using a page visually, you can understand when a menu system is collapsed or expanded because you can see it. For assistive technology users, there needs to be a programmatic solution so that the state of the menu can be announced to them, such as my menu collapsed, my menu expanded. There is an ARIA property called ARIA expanded, which can be used to announce that information just as mentioned. Its value should be true or false according to whether the expanded state of the menu it operates is expanded or collapsed. There's a link here for just going a little more into ARIA from the W3Org website. So as mentioned, the ARIA expanded attribute is mainly used to tell assistive technologies when an element is hidden, collapsed, or visible, expanded. So when the menu opens, the link tag that opened it should update its own ARIA expanded property to be true. And when the menu is closed, the link that closed it should update its ARIA expanded to be false. So it represents the menu it controls. Such coding can be achieved using a script language such as JavaScript or VB script or any script you like. So on the next slide here, next slide, sorry. So here's an example of a simple expandable menu list. Again, it's a little bit of code here, but it's relatively simple. The top line is the controlling link. It operates the collapsing or expanding of the below menu, and itself will store the ARIA expanded attribute property. Following that is a simple menu list that is displayed or hidden accordingly by the controlling link. The controlling link opens or closes the UL list menu of links, and it updates its own ARIA expanded property to reflect the currently expanded or collapsed state of the menu. So on this next page, I'm giving you a representative example of a function that would do what I just described. I won't go into detail about this particular code, but in this example, the function receives the IDs of both the controlling link, so it can update the ARIA expanded property and link text, and then the menu ID, so that it can display or hide the menu accordingly. Many frameworks or advanced JavaScript would actually use event handlers to manage these interactions. So this is a very simplified but a functional example of a menu toggler. And this slide shows you the visualization of that menu toggling. So here we show how the menu might appear and how it should act when used to expand or collapse the menu list of links. In collapsed view, the link text says open menu and the menu is not visible. And you can see by the very first arrow there that it says area expanded is false. In expanded view, the link text will say close menu and the menu is visible. And you will see on the second arrow there, the area expanded property is now true. In both instances, the area expanded property is updated at the same time as the link text. And that's all you need to make your expandable menus and collapsible menus accessible to AT users. And we come to headings, which is a hugely important part of your document and often woefully misunderstood. A primary part of document structure are the heading tags. They lay down the foundation for AT users to quickly understand your available content. Headings are one of the major navigation methods available to assistive technology users for browsing your content. So they're a critical component of your document's organization. Unlike some accessibility issues, which might be fixed in a single or central file, headings, however, are usually very specific to each web page and therefore require careful placement at proper levels, such as an H2, H3, H4, and so on. So here's a visual example of a good and a bad heading nesting order. The situation is if you have a H1 tag on the page and then you have an H3 tag appear, you essentially have a skipped heading. And you're basically going to leave some assistive technology users wondering or guessing about your content, whether they missed something or whether it's just poorly constructed. So it is important to get your headings correct and essentially in order. So in review, the best practices for heading, in fact, a lot of the requirements for headings are that each page should have exactly only one H1 heading tag. And that will indicate the main title of the page. You can have as many other heading tags as you like from H2 to H6 repeated on the page, as long as they are in sequential order. Now headings are hierarchical, so the level H1 indicates a level 1 heading. The tag H2 would indicate a level 2 heading. And they go from H1 to H6, level 1 through 6. Again, there should be one H tag on each page, but there can be multiple other heading levels as long as they do not skip a level. So now we come to area next one, area landmarks. There we go. Sometimes web pages become extremely busy with content. You know, they can have banners, sidebars, and all sorts of information going on. And trying to find or read a particular content section can be an extremely difficult task, especially for assistive technology users. Area landmarks, which are essentially roles on an element, can be labeled and navigated and allow assistive technology users to browse them that way. They can actually press the D key to jump through your area landmarks, or they can press another key to open up a list of your area landmarks and actually jump specifically to the landmark they choose. There are some common area landmarks people use. There's a main, navigation, banner, complementary, and content info. And there are a few others too. And I've provided a few links here to area landmarks and their usage on the W3C website. In this next slide, I'm actually showing you how the W3C is organizing their landmarks. You can see by construct, the very top here has a banner. The left side is its primary navigation, so it has been given a role of navigation. You can see the main content in the center there, which would be the targeted content, which you would make scroll to from a skip link, for instance. And then other content, which is ancillary, can be complementary or called content info. And again, those links on the previous slide will give you a little more information on what roles are available and what you might want to use for your particular application or website. So in reviewing area landmarks, how do you apply an area landmark? you simply add a role attribute to a container element. So you can make a container div element the main role section by simply adding a role equals main. And that way assistive technologies will understand and recognize that area as a landmark, and they'll be able to jump directly to your main content, even without using a skip link or other navigation methods. You can also use some HTML5 more contemporary tags. HTML5 has a main tag, for instance, which by default is implicitly comes along with the role of main. But due to browser compatibility issues, you're often going to want to add a role of main regardless of whether it has an implicit role built into the tag itself. So we come to forms. There's a lot to do with forms, but the overview is that all form fields and their associated controls, such as submit buttons, must have an accessible text. For buttons and controls, this involves having proper text available and making sure it's accessible to AT users. This can mean plain text on a button or alt text on a control icon or image button, or in some cases, adding an ARIA label or ARIA labeled by attribute, which can point to another element that describes it. For each input element, there should be an explicit label created using a for attribute, pointing to the ID of an input element. But an important note is, do not use placeholder text as a label. Placeholder text in fields is not a replacement for a proper accessible label. Additionally, for groups of controls, you can add field sets and legend tags. And I'll go into that in the next few slides here. So this slide shows a code example for checkboxes. Every option has an explicit label using a for attribute that points to the ID of the input it is labeling. This particular system is checkboxes, so that's what I call a grouped control. So I'm going to want to group that with an overarching label, and we use a field set to do that. So we wrap the controls in a field set, and then the first item in the field set is a legend, which ends up becoming the central label for this group of controls, even though individually the checkboxes have their own explicit labels. And you can use this type of code pattern with a field set and legend to group any kind of similar information together, and it will vastly help accessibility users to understand what's going on with your multi-selection controls. And this next example is almost exactly the same, except it applies to radio buttons. There's a slight difference between radio and checkboxes in that with radio buttons, only one item is typically selectable. Therefore, each radio element must have a unique value as well as an explicit label. But essentially, this is the same as the previous grouping scenario. Again, you can use a field set to group the set and a legend tag to describe as a label all of the options therein. And we come to tables. So tables that have tabulated data under them are known as data tables. Tables that are not providing tabulated data are usually called layout tables. And they're often used to position content to the right or vertically aligned to the top or to the left. And it's generally these days a bad idea to be using tables for layout. If you do have a table that's used for layout and you cannot avoid it, or you have inherited some code you can't change, what you can do to that table to stop assistive technology recognizing it as a table and announcing it annoyingly and incorrectly to assistive technology users, you can actually add a role equals presentation to the table. And that will essentially tell assistive technology that this is not a table, do not announce it as a table. So again, tables should not be used for layout. They should be used with a scope equals col attribute in the table headings. And we'll go into that on the next slide a little bit. And we'll also show you how to add a caption which can describe the table or label the table as a whole on the next slide. So some tables can contain complex structures or something that maybe isn't simple tabulated data. You can use a summary element to provide additional information about your table to users. It is often not needed. You can just use a caption tag, which gives just a a quick description of what your table is. But if you absolutely must give more information or instruction on how to use the table or how it's laid out, you can add a summary element right beneath the caption. In tables, you can also use the T-head and T-body elements, but they do have no accessibility impact. They're not good, they're not bad, they have no positive or negative accessible side effects to tables at all. So go ahead and use T-head and T-body, or don't use T-head and T-body. It won't matter regarding accessibility. So here we're showing a very simple table, an example of a simple data table, in fact, along with an appropriate caption tag and the relevant TH scope attributes. You can see the caption text above the table in this example. It says recently released ebooks. A note that in the T-body section on the right side there, each row also has a heading, a TH tag, with a scope of row. So on the left side, we're operating a T-head row, the very first row, and that provides headings for all of the columns beneath it. So when it provides headings for columns, we provide an attribute scope equals col. And when you have a heading that's describing a row, we provide a scope equals row attribute. So to recap, use appropriate elements for their default semantic purpose, reinforcing native roles with ARIA only when necessary. ARIA is an excellent set of properties and tools to use, and you can read up more about them on the W3 website. But be aware that bad or incorrect use of ARIA properties is often worse than no use of ARIA at all, so try to get it right when you do use them. Things to remember also include adding a skip link to your page, using headings consistently and sequentially, and making sure that groups of links are within list elements, actual native list elements. Make sure you label all form fields explicitly, ensure controls all have accessible names and texts, and just generally make sure that text is available for any non-visual element that's of any importance on your page. Ensure that imagery has empty or concisely populated alt text properties. Don't ignore the alt attribute, always provide it. Try to use tables for tabulated data, not layout or formatting. CSS is more than powerful enough these days to style your layout without requiring tables. But if you must use a table for layout or have inherited a table that is a layout table, then again, add that role equals presentation to the table so it doesn't become an accessibility barrier to AT users. There's a lot that can be done to your websites and apps to make them more accessible. I hope this presentation has been somewhat helpful in illustrating the main accessibility user experience points. If you begin applying these techniques, you'll be making significant progress to providing an accessible user experience for your audience. And remember, practicing accessibility consideration can help make your content more accessible by default, which is a much better situation than modifying an existing structure and trying to supplement accessibility as a band-aided approach. And I thank you all for attending this webinar and all your future accessibility efforts. Good luck, and I'll hand this over to David for any questions you might have.
Yes, thank you, Gary. So before we go to the Q&A part of our presentation today, I just wanted to remind everybody that we do have another webinar coming up on the 8th on what needs to be accessible and compliant on a website. So if you're interested in that, go to our website and sign up for it. And we look forward to continuing the conversation on web accessibility and document accessibility. So with that, let's go to our Q&A. And looks like I got several questions so far, and we'll see where this goes. So how do we test accessibility on a federal website? Is the first question.
This is Kim. I can take that because it's not technical. How do you test it? There are two components to testing and auditing. Automated scanning, which is going to grab the low-hanging fruit and test that way, and then manual testing. And manual testing really needs to be done by individuals with disabilities along with a cited subject matter expert. So that combination of both automated and manual or human testing is what needs to be done on any website, whether it's federal or non.
And one piece I would add to that, on a lot of federal websites contain a lot of PDF documents. So from a testing standpoint, you're going to want to download those PDFs. You're going to want to see that they're tagged for accessibility, and then you're going to want to check them using a screen reader or using some testing software to determine that the tagging is correct, and that in the same way that a website needs to accurately describe the document so that assistive technology will work properly with it, allow you to navigate it and go to the content you're looking for, the tag structure needs to map it in the same way HTML needs to be set up properly to work with assistive technology. So you can test documents with testing software to determine at a high level what needs to be done, and then you can actually test it with assistive technology. So the next question, it says, hi, this is a skip similar to a jump. I read things more like learn about this after the jump when reading articles online, and I don't know what this really is. So this was your skip, is sometimes referred to as a jump, I think is what the question's asking.
Yeah, I guess that, I mean, it's confusing to me as well, because it's a little bit presumptive that you know where you're jumping to. But I would imagine that this is actually an example of a skip link.
That makes sense. So my next question here, it says, in WordPress, for decorative images, should I add decorative in the alt text field or leave it blank?
Definitely not. Any image that doesn't present literal text or have emotional or significant meaning to the use and control of the page should have an empty alt value. And this is a commonly misunderstood practice. Some people will ignore the alt tag. Some people will describe how the alt, in the alt tag, how the image looks. But the reality is, if the image has significance, meaning, and you need to know what that image does or looks like to operate the page, then and only then do you provide a populated alt tag. All other times you provide an empty alt tag value, alt equals quote, quote.
And similar situation is in PDF documents where if it's decorative images that have no meaning being conveyed, they're typically archived, so they're not in the tag structure because there's no reason to describe something that would just confuse the listener, so the user of the document. Next question is, for those who rely on alt tags, are logos considered decorative?
That's actually a very good question. Not too long ago, it was a common practice to say logo of BOA.org, for instance. But often the logo that people are using is also a link. So it depends on the semantics of what's going on here. Typically, people, because it's a link, will, instead of describing the logo or saying it's a logo, simply describe the purpose of the logo, which in most cases is to take you to the home page. So a common practice these days is to have your logo not be described, but if it's a link, say, just simply go to home page. If your logo is there, then you can do that argument again where we said, you know, is it important or essential for me to read that image to operate this page? And I would argue the answer is no. But you could, it's a subjective scenario, but you could decide to say, you know, Bureau of Internet Accessibility logo. But, you know, don't go any further. Typically, you would just avoid describing it at all because they know where they are by reading the text on your domain name or by reading the content of your web page. But it is a little bit subjective.
Next question is, can the H1 be hidden?
No. I mean, it depends on, you know, if you want it to be visually hidden, you know, you can argue, sure, that that's still in the accessible tree and that a non-visual user could still access it. But really, accessibility is about equalizing the playing field. The visual guys and the non-visual guys need access to the same information. So why would you hide an H1? If you hide an H1 from visual, it's not seen. If it's available to a non-visual user, it is seen. That's a disparity between the information. Not only that, if you hide an H1, so it's not accessible, then all your other headings are now wrong because they're out of sequence because they don't have an H1 parent. So in short, no, do not hide the H1.
And the next question is related to H1. It says, why not use title instead of H1 and then use H1 for the main topics on the page?
Well, title is a tag that appears within the head, so it's not a visual. And H1 is like, decades old standard for labeling the page. So the H1 is probably the most important part of your entire web page. How you position the H1, how it appears, is up to you in styling. Just make sure it exists there and it has a value.
Next question was going back to the federal websites. It says, thank you for your answer in regard to accessibility. In terms of an automated tool, would you please share a few tools or give us a website that I can reference? Thanks.
Sure, you can, on the W3C's website, you can find, there's a big list there. We have our own scanning tool, and that's the information on that is on our website. Also, if, when you go even to the 508.gov, you'll find some tools there. There are a lot of free tools out there that may do one page at a time, but there are some that will do more than one page at a time. So it depends on what and how many web pages you have. But a good start would be to go to the W3C site.
So the next question is, what is the best way to decide the characteristics of H1, H2, etc. for good accessibility and aesthetics, PX sizes, styles? Is there things to avoid in designing this portion of a website?
Oh, that's an excellent question, but it's way too long and involved to give you a decent answer now. But I can give you a short one, and that is, you can style anything how you want. It's really not going to affect accessibility that much unless you style things badly with color contrast or font size is too small. So you can absolutely style an H1 to be smaller than H2 and it not cause an accessibility problem. So regarding font sizes, there's definitely some font sizes that are required regarding color contrast. Typically, an 18 point or 18 pixel font, I can't remember which one off the top of my head, is the general best default font size to have on the website, or larger, to avoid any particular contrast related issues. But if you go to color.a11y.com, I believe there's some little tools there that might show you how to, when you're looking at color contrast, it will also advise you on font size about that color contrast.
And Jody, I advanced to the slide that has contact information. So if you want to reach out to Kim's email address here, we can give you maybe the longer answer to some of those things if you'd like that.
Absolutely.
Next question is, I've seen H1 set in sliders. Is that even recommended?
In sliders?
Yes.
I'm a little unsure on the context of that. But an H1 should typically be persistent. So if it's going to move into or out of view, it's probably a bad practice.
Kim, did you want to add to that?
No, I was wondering the context as well. If it was referring to like image sliding back and forth, or yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Sure.
I mean, there essentially should be one H1 tag. So that H1 tag is there to describe the overall page. So it really should not be subject to minor content or changes or sliding below it.
And the last question I have here, it says, how do you provide accessibility for clients who are deaf and blind?
Aha, that's a good one. Well, some of what we discussed will apply to offer your information to assistive technology. So the question then converts slightly more into, well, how is that user accessing the web? They might have a Braille device, they might have some vibration device. It depends on what the assistive technology use is. But what you need to know as a developer or somebody who's providing the website content is that you did your best to provide text equivalence. And it is the assistive technology that will then convert that text equivalency into the appropriate things for a deaf, blind, or deaf and blind user to use. My guess is a deaf and blind user would use a form of vibration of Braille dots that appear when reading your content. But it is totally up to the AT or the assistive technology. And as long as you provide the accessible text and a decent structure, they will access it the same as any other kind of person.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the question box here. So we're going to move on from there. So with that, so I want to thank everybody again for our presenters today for the presentation. We will have this has been captioned and it's been recorded. So we will have the caption video up on our website in a couple days. Once that's released, we'll let you know that that's available. If you're interested in any of our additional webinars, please come to our websites and take a look at the login or the registrations that we have up on our websites for the future webinars. And again, I want to thank everybody for your time today, and be safe, and we will talk soon. Thank you very much.